everyone. Welcome to eShe South Asia Union Summit led by women. You're watching session 11 on day 2 of the summit. This panel is titled Doctrine of Oppression, the Gendered Cost of Religious Extremism. Our panelists will discuss why and how religious extremism targets women first and most of all, whether it's the Taliban in Afghanistan, caste-based sexual violence in India, or attacks on feminists in Pakistan and Bangladesh. My name is Aekta Kapoor. I'm the founder of eShe. I'm honored to introduce our panelists to you today. First up, we have Khushi Kabir, a feminist activist and an environmentalist from Bangladesh. She has taken up issues involving land and water rights, secularism, environmental justice, food sovereignty, and ensuring democratic values and accountability at all levels. Since 1980, Khushi has worked with Nijera Kori, an NGO that has successfully created strong autonomous organizations of the rural poor in Bangladesh. She's also an honorary coordinator and advisor to the feminist network Sangat and is the Bangladesh coordinator for the 1 Billion Rising campaign. She's vice chairperson for the Bangladesh chapter of South Asia Foundation, and she's joining us from Dhaka. Welcome, Khushi, to the panel.
Hello. Hello,
Uh,
everybody.
so nice to have you. Our
Glad to be
second
here.
panelist is one of the most vocal advocates for India-Pakistan peace, Beena Sarwar. She is an editor, writer, university lecturer, media consultant, and documentary filmmaker with over 20 years of experience. She heads Aman Ki Asha, a platform for regional peace, and currently teaches journalism at Emerson College, Boston. She's the founder-curator of the coalition South Asia Peace Action Network, also called SAPAN, which was launched earlier this year. And she's one of the collaborators of this summit. So happy to have you here, Beena. And I'm also
Lovely to
proud
be
to
here.
be part of SAPAN as a founding member and volunteer along with you and Khushi.
Thank you.
We also have today Mariam Safi. Mariam is the founding director of the Organization for Policy Research and Development Studies, DROPS, in a Kabul-based research institute. She's a scholar and academic specializing in women and public policy in Afghanistan and has participated in many peace-building efforts, including briefing the United Nations Security Council on the challenges faced by women in the Afghan peace process. She is currently in Canada, having escaped from Kabul during the Taliban takeover, and is helping to evacuate others. I'm very glad that you and your team are safe, Mariam, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Our next panelist is Riya Singh. Riya is co-founder and core committee member at Dalit Women Fight, which is India's single largest Dalit women-led collective that caters to the socio-legal and physiological needs of the survivors of caste atrocities. She is a PhD scholar at Ambedkar University, Delhi, and an ICSSR Doctor Fellowship awardee. Her area of expertise is crime, law, caste, and gender. Welcome to the panel, Riya. I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you.
I'd like to start this session with Beena. You've grown up at a time of Zia's Hudud ordinances in Pakistan that used Islamic law or Sharia law as a tool to oppress women who are literally half the population of the country. But though these laws were designed to oppress women, they also gave rise to Pakistan's fiercest feminist movement with icons like Asma Jahangir. So, looking back, what would you say have been the most pervasive effects of Zia's legacy for women?
Thank you, Ekta. That's a great question. And I think it relates to all of South Asia, perhaps, in the sense that I think Mariam and Ria might also, and Khushi would also be able to relate to this, that when there is oppression, there is also a pushback and fight back. And we don't take things lying down, and we will fight back. Zia's legacy, we can see actually right now exactly in the trajectory in what Afghanistan is going through, because at that time, how religion was used for politics, it was also because of the first, that not the first, but the war in Afghanistan next door, when America and Saudi Arabia collaborated with Pakistan to try and get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. And in the process, they very cynically used religion as a tool. And Afghanistan's war of national liberation against the Soviets, which many of them thought was an invasion, was turned into a religious war. And jihad and again I'm putting it in quotes because the greater jihad is the struggle within, and the jihad of weapons and fighting and and all that, and also that other jihad, the lesser jihad, even has very strict rules of engagement. You cannot target women, children, non-combatants, destroy crops, water, all kinds of, there's rules there. But we see that this so-called jihad that has been fought in Afghanistan, by originally by the Mujahideen, like I said, when they had that whole situation, and Pakistan was the frontline state where these so-called Mujahideen or so-called holy warriors were developed and cultivated from around the world. Um, so the General Zia, I mean, maybe it would have been anybody at that time who was heading the country. I don't know, but it was a military dictator. He had no mandate of the people, and he, developed this madrasa system, the religious, so-called religious school system. Madrasa is a traditional, the traditional schools which are not meant to be indoctrinating people in how to fight. And the Taliban that emerged, so Talib literally means student, and Taliban is the plural of student. So Taliban literally means students. So the students of these madrasas, when the vacuum was left after the Soviets left and the America abandoned Afghanistan, left this vacuum, everybody pulled out. So they went into the vacuum to against the social injustices of that time, and we are seeing that again right now. I mean, many of them. Anyway, that's a long story, but that is the most enduring legacy, I think, of the Zia years. Is this, and what we see this. The Ministry of Prevention of Vice and Promotion of Virtue and all that, which is also there in Saudi Arabia, by the way, and also in Iran. So Pakistan is not the only country, and Afghanistan is not the only country that have these. But these are institutions, the moral policing, which began in Zia's time. I remember suddenly women were asked to cover their heads and not to go out, not to go out in public, not to be in public places, and there was a lot of oppression at that time. And I remember being as a teenager at the time, the oppression and the sense of fear and how women felt. So I really feel for our Afghan sisters, because they are going through this times whatever 100,000 times. That trajectory is what I think is his most enduring legacy, as well as the fight back, from the women, as you said, which you're seeing that in Afghanistan as well. We've seen how the Revolutionary Association of Afghan Women, or RAWA, came up under the, in the first earlier reign of oppression, and I'm sure that it will happen again.
Right. I'll come to Khushi now, and I'll come back to you with more questions later on. Khushi, one of the areas where you worked is on the use of fatwas as a form of repression. And can you tell us more about the current situation in Bangladesh and how fatwas are still being used to silence women who speak up?
Yeah, thank you. Fatwa actually is a decree, and what happens is that very often, and in most places, people use their different ways of using, oppressive modes and roles to keep the more oppressed down, and especially women. And fatwas is used as a religious decree to decide on what can be done and what is supposed to be legit within Islam. Bangladesh is basically 90% almost Muslim, so it's a very Muslim. Most of the population are Muslim. So what the fatwa does is that you have these religious clerics and leaders who decide that this is what religion has stated should be done when they see anyone who goes outside of what the box or the norm they have decided for women to be. And very often I have found that, because if I divide my time, I'll see that about 65 to 70% of my time is with rural people, especially women. And because I live in Dhaka and because I've had a long experience of working, a lot of the time is also women in general, and even from in areas we don't work in, people start coming in. The fatwas are more a rural phenomena than a urban phenomena. Though in the urban areas also we now have a lot of religious, the imams of mosques or the khatibs of some of the larger mosques trying to give fatwas against people, especially women. Now, when you look at fatwas as such, it is, there is, if you look at it in terms of people who've done research on it and all that, it has to have a certain, follow a certain system and a rule. But when you start, people who oppress and use religion as a means of oppression, because, when you are trying to suppress, you use many kind of you know what I would say is faith-based beliefs and all that. So so they try and use that without going into what the facts are and what the reality is. And religion often teaches you to never question. So when you don't want to question, you use religion in trying to stop everybody from asking questions. So fatwa was very common at one point, leading to even stoning and women of, especially in the 90s. And that was something that became quite prevalent till the women's organizations all over the country, we rose up. And now the court has given an order that fatwas are illegal. So officially and legally, because of the court order, fatwas are illegal. But as all of us know, I think in all of our countries, that what is stated in our constitution and our laws and what people practice and what believe in, when you use obscurantism as a means of trying to suppress people, then the laws and the constitution become of secondary importance. So we are very active in trying to see how we can make this much more open and take this information across everywhere, that fatwas are illegal and we've got to stop fatwas from taking place. So yes, at this present moment, fatwas is less now because of the fear that we will be taking it up to court, making a big fuss about it. But inside, there are still many ways of trying to use fatwas without making it into a public, because before it used to be like a public gathering and then announcing the fatwa there. Now it's trying to be done in a more covert manner and trying to use it to stop women from speaking out, going out, or breaking rules and becoming much more independent. So the fight is now trying to talk about what is it that these people are professing as being religion and as faith, and what it isn't, and what the laws state and where things are wrong. So I think because people do believe, they have a faith and they believe, it's very easy to use religion in a way just for your own purpose, as trying to control politically, economically, every other way your own position. And we find a lot of the fatwas, when we looked deep into it, had to do with land, had to do with property, had to do with positions. And that is where they used fatwa, because anyone who tried to question their position and status, it was a very easy way of lashing out by using women and targeting women. So yeah.
So while the laws have come in, to support women, there's still a clash of civilizations,
That's I think
religious systems, and egalitarian laws. Yeah, so we'll come back to that point. Let's move to Mariam now. Mariam, you have more than a decade of experience as a strategy expert. You've been working and engaging with the United Nations, the European Union, and several global think tanks and academic institutions. I'm curious to know what prompted you to return from Canada to Afghanistan to set up your NGO, and what were the conditions in Afghanistan at that time that triggered your decision, and were you concerned about the radicalization that was still going on? Sorry, you have to unmute yourself, Mariam.
My apologies. In terms of deciding to return back to Afghanistan, I'm a student of peace building and conflict resolution. And my research focus had always been Afghanistan. And that was one of the biggest factors that prompted me to return to Afghanistan, to understand the context by experiencing and seeing ground realities firsthand. And throughout that process, one of the reasons that pushed me to then establish my own organization, Drops, was this growing gap between citizens and the government. So the public was becoming more and more disenfranchised with the governance that was taking place in the country, and that was for several reasons. And I've long believed that in states where people can genuinely participate in the decisions that affect their lives and well-being, can democracy flourish. And in keeping with this belief, I felt that through Indigenous research that represented ground realities and cited policy dialogue and public-private partnerships, can such an environment be built to nourish these intellectual spaces that I felt were missing and bridge the gap between citizens and state. And so one of the reasons why we started Drops was to be able to do this. And how we did this in Afghanistan, to also counter some of these narratives that were also emerging from both violent and non-violent extremist groups on the position and place and status of women in Afghan society, was to ensure that women had a role and say in the decision-making circles in the country. And so women's role in decision-making circles about 12 years ago was still very symbolic. It was still symbolic even in the recent past. And so what we want to do was put into place a structure that would help both equip women and girls with the tools required for critical analysis, research, policy development, and also give them a platform to then advocate those. And in that process, we developed the Afghanistan Women in Public Policy Journal, which was the first of its kind in Afghanistan's history. We are in our 7th year now, and we have topics that range from elections to regional security to the peace process to elections to good governance. And we also then took that one step further, and we started and launched the Afghanistan Women in Peacebuilding Journal last year. And the aim of that journal in particular was to document the initiatives, the peacebuilding initiatives that Afghanistan had adopted through its international partners since 2001, and identify what worked and what didn't work in our context. Afghanistan is the longest peacebuilding mission in the United Nations history, the longest mission in US history, EU history, and NATO history. So there's an immense body of knowledge there. And what we wanted to do was make sure that the knowledge we were producing, the lens behind this knowledge, were those of women, where they could experience, or they could share their experiences. And similarly, our work expanded through policy analysis training programs for both men and women. And the third component of our work was our advocacy program, which was take what we have produced, the knowledge that we have on hand, and now table this to policymakers. And so that way, we wanted to also build a bridge between policymakers and policy research. See, focus in Afghanistan and the research community was very much donor-driven for a number of years. And so the work that was being produced in Afghanistan, lacked a gender lens. Women were objects of research. They were not the lens behind it in the analysis. And second of all, they would hardly get into the hands of policymakers. And so they would hardly get into the hands of the public and civil society actors. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to start filling that particular gap. And so we also created an advocacy network of women thinkers, researchers, and analysts to be able to advocate the findings they use. So the model we had in Afghanistan for Drops was a triangle. So the aim was that you had policy research, policy training, and policy advocacy. And you could enter through any one of these spaces, but you would have to go through all three. And by doing so, we could create those intellectual spaces that could nourish thought, that could nourish conversations, that could change the narratives that we were receiving, not only from violent and nonviolent extremist groups, but generally narratives that were discouraging and were creating barriers for women's progress in the country.
Okay, we'll come back to the topic of women and especially the relationship with the Taliban. We'll come back to that. I'll just bring in Riya into the conversation now. Riya, coming to India, though we live in a very diverse country with lots of different religions and traditions, what has remained unchanged through the centuries, and this is a very frustrating fact, is the caste system. And despite our constitution, despite our democracy, despite so many activists and organized groups, till today, this scar doesn't seem to leave us. So, what has your experience, especially as a daughter of progressive parents and as a young Dalit feminist yourself, can you share your experience about this?
I think with respect to caste, there is so much of hesitation, and people distance themselves, upper caste people and progressive people, even the leftist feminists that I've seen, progressive feminists that I've seen. I've been in academia for like 9 years, 10 years, and all, and I'm a student of gender studies, so I have all these uh, feminists who've been a part of like women's movement, who have led these movements in India. So I see that there's a hesitation when it comes to acknowledge that there are biases based on caste. There is a prejudice that people follow. So there's a divide for sure, but I think the caste remains, the issue of caste is same in rural and urban areas. However, the form changes. So in campus, you'll see feminists and men practicing different forms of casteism with people who come from Dalit backgrounds. And in rural area, you will see more brutal form of where you'll see atrocities or sexual violence on Dalit women's body. So it's like never ending. I totally agree. And we're also in a vicious cycle of, you know, locating that, how can we bring an end to this? But in my experience of being in academia and also working on ground with survivors of caste atrocities, I think we haven't been able to cross the barrier of, not identify certain people as low caste or somebody whom people will create a boundary from. So the religion plays a very important role where Hindu groups will keep this distinction in their head that we are ex untouchables and we are dirty, we are polluted, we are engaged in work which is not clean, associated with dirt. So even if we have a mobility in terms of education and in monetary terms, I don't think that people give up looking at our caste identities. So where you're in university or back in villages or in urban cities in upper middle class localities, you still have to confront, because the first question is, okay, who you are. You're Hindu, but then what caste are you from? So these questions are like something that people should give up on. But these are like fundamental queries of every citizen in this country, that what caste you belong to. And I don't think that until this fundamental query that, what caste background we come from ends, there wouldn't be any end to caste oppression.
Yeah. Um, we talked the other day also, we talked about how, despite the education, despite all the work that has been done, even today, even amongst the most educated elite of India, this problem still exists. I'll come back to that. Let me come to Beena now. Now, Beena, you and I were talking about, you like to use double quotes when you talk about religious extremism, because it's more about power than about religion. So can you please elaborate on that, especially in the South Asian context where, religion is increasingly being used in politics?
Yeah, so I think what everybody has said before me just now also speaks to that point, that how religion is used for power. And Khushi talked about the fatwas, Riya talked about casteism. And I think in the case, I just want to add one point to what Riya said, that, in Pakistan also, and this actually, and I see this another legacy of the Zia years, to go back to your first question, is the so-called blasphemy laws, in which the what the British had left behind for in undivided India at that time, which came into our constitutions if India and Pakistan, was Article 295 of the Constitution, which is about injuring religious sentiments. So that has been expanded. That was in Zia's times. That was expanded, and extreme punishments introduced for various violations. I won't go into those, but you've all heard of the so-called blasphemy cases in Pakistan of the Christian woman who was, on death row because she drank water from the well that the Muslim women were drinking from. So that's not about Muslim and Christian. It's again about power and caste, because her caste was used. It was because there is no such limitation in Islam. For example, talk about religion, right? You're talking, and they're saying you have defiled our religion by drinking water from the same cup. Well, Islam has no such restrictions. And the reason why she was targeted is because she was from the lowest caste in that village. And speaking about Ria's point about education and income, her family had become upwardly mobile. Her children were going to school. She herself was educated. Her husband was educated. They were in a better place than some other Muslims in that village. So there were jealousies, and there was, like, this feeling that how can these, I don't want to use the derogatory words that I used for them, but how can these people be our level? So it's about, at the end of it, it's about human dignity and equality, and not willing to give somebody the same space at the table as yourself because you think they are lesser human beings than you. In the end, it boils down to that, to human dignity and respect. And that's used for this, for the caste oppression. And so, sorry, Ekta, your question again was about, I
Power.
don't know.
How it's actually about power and it's not
Yeah,
about
so I think
religion.
I think that, I
Yeah.
think I've addressed that pretty much.
Yeah.
It's about holding on to the status quo, and the
Yeah.
people who are fighting against the status quo, whether they are and whether they are women, and within women from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds, or the women from the lowest caste, or the, within all those tears, it's the women who get the brunt of the stick, but it's also the women who are leading the fight to change, to be the change, like our friend Kamla Bhasin used to say. Is that, and so many, we all sort of know about these, be the change. And I just talked earlier about the greater jihad is the struggle within. So those are values and things that we need to just keep holding on to and taking forward, because in the end, the people who are engaged in these atrocities against Dalits and Muslims in India, and against Ahmadis and Shias and other people they consider to be non-Muslims in Pakistan, they are on the wrong side of history, or the Taliban in Afghanistan, because they are fighting to keep a system of life, to keep a way of life, of how they dress, how they wear, how they eat, who they eat with, and all those things. They are fighting to keep that intact. And change is coming. The young people are the change. We are the change. And these values are obsolete now. Nobody with a half a rational mind believes in these. But like Riya said, that some of these values are so entrenched and so conditioned that even people who consider themselves to be tolerant and open-minded and all that will display these prejudices, will display these kind of pre- and engage in what is called, it's a term I learned here in the United States, a term called microaggressions, where they it might be unconscious even. And then I think it is upon us to, rather than react and say, you did this or you did that, but to sort of engage with them and gently get them to understand what their behavior, the damage their behavior is causing. And I'll just close with something which I think I've talked to you about this, Ekta, before. Also, I think I might have sent it to you. Also, there's a brilliant discussion that I came across last year, and it was called Black, Dalit, and Shiddi Solidarities, with an American professor here in Boston, and the Shidi leader. Shidi, for those who don't know, is the people of African descent in Pakistan, and we've had our first Shidi member of parliament was elected, recently into the Sindh Assembly, and the Dalit, there was a Dalit leader from India, and so they were talking, and so I'm just trying to basically. I feel like I'm taking too much time, but I just want to quickly say that basically it's about oppression and power, and whether it is race it expresses itself as race in the United States, and we've seen last year how the Black Lives Matter movement and all that, and the way that the blacks are disproportionately in prison in the United States. It's the same thing for South Asia, where the people from the lower castes and the lower socioeconomic backgrounds are in prisons at a greater proportion. So it's, again, that's basically, I think I've kind of made my point, so I'll shut up now. Sorry.
No, no, that's right. What you're saying is correct. It's a power hierarchy. It's not so much of, it's not actually. Religion is the excuse.
It's the tool that
Khushi,
is
I'll,
used. Yeah.
yeah, it's the tool. Khushi, I'll come to you. We're talking about, there's a rise in right-wing forces and strength all over the world, actually, not just in South Asia, but very much so in South Asia. And a lot of hardline religious clerics and priests, they'll use this thing that, our religion is in danger. And so whenever anybody questions their traditions or anybody criticizes their traditions, they'll be like, oh, our religion is in danger. And these kind of calls are used not just as fatwas, but even on social media. It kind of creates this hue and cry, and then writers and bloggers are attacked, and we've heard these stories from Bangladesh as well. Even women are not safe from their own neighbors, and people who were their former friends, suddenly they become swayed by these religious appeals. So what are your thoughts on secular thoughts coming under brutal attacks?
I'm glad you asked this question, Ekta. Bangladesh is being projected everywhere, which it has had. It's done. I mean, if I look at my work right from the early 70s, immediately after liberation, and what the situation in Bangladesh, and especially Bangladeshi women, poorer Bangladeshi women, women from marginalized, from more excluded communities lived, and also, the kind of hardship, both economic, the social, everything that existed, and to what is now, we've made a lot of progress. And Bangladesh is also, feted for having reached a lot of the MDGs, SDGs, and now they're moving fast
Yeah.
towards the MDGs. All these are targets, but it hasn't changed people's mindsets in any way whatsoever. And what is the biggest issue I find now is, in order to stay in power, whichever party is in power, the first thing they try and appease is the religious sentiments.
Hmm.
And so, what the question you're asking is very, very relevant, because while the government is trying to say we are trying to reach equality for women, we're trying to, the gap between men and women and all the kind of the discrepancies that exist, whether it's education, whether it's a life expectancy. And in life expectancy, we've done quite well. In terms of many other issues and vaccination, all other things, we've done much better. It's open. We have the speaker of the national parliament is a woman. Our prime minister has been a woman since 91. So we have all these policies. We have, as I told you before, that how the fatwa has been considered that it is not a legal edict at all and cannot be used, and yet it gets used. But what happens is, no government in power, no major political party is willing to even question any of the religious organizations, and including not just the Muslim clerics and the Muslim imams and the Muslim khatibs and the Muslim, religious organization. We see the way the government is funding lot of madrasas, and there are two kinds of madrasas. One is a madrasa that is under a madrasa board that is controlled by the government. How well the government controls it or how well it runs is a different issue altogether. But we have the Qawmi madrasas, which is the Deobandi kind, and that Qaumi Madrasa is teaching the kind of, they won't let any government ever have a say, or any community leaders or anybody know what the madrasa is teaching, nothing about the curriculum, nothing about the quality of education. Yet they demanded and got that their highest degree be equivalent and recognized by the government as equivalent to a master's degree. So here you're having a whole group of people being taught God knows what, and then being able to state that I have a master's degree and so I can get into any job or any situation whatsoever. And the kind of money that's being pushed in, and the way the government will pander to them, like when these people start, anytime anyone starts raising questions. You talked about the bloggers. You talked about people who've been who are who are rational thinkers. People who have who talk about
Secularism.
secularism. We're all talking. Secularism is part of our constitution. It says Bangladesh is a secular state. It's one of our 4 pillars. Yet Bangladesh is also the state religion of Bangladesh is Islam. How can you have such a absolutely opposing dichotomic kind of a statement within your own constitution? You can't have a state religion which is Islam, any religion, and then say you're a secular state. So there is all these issues which allow the fermentation of using obscurantist religious edicts, and not only just Muslim, but even we have about a 9% Hindu population. It's gone down over the years, but 9% is not, when you have a population of 160 million, is what we call in South Asian terms, over 16 crores. So then when you talk about 9%, it's a large population. And though we don't have, as Beena was saying, Islam is not supposed to have any casteism. And yet you see that there are Dalits in Bangladesh. And the way they're treated is like the treatment is the same. And yet you have Hindu religious groups who are being fanned, who try and woo the Dalits to their sides against an Islam. So there's a kind of a backlash against religious minorities, be they Buddhist, be they indigenous communities. I mean, I think every month there is a fight we fight on burning down of or eviction of indigenous communities, burning down of temples, burning down of the Buddhist temples, Hindu temples. So we are again fighting that, and all this is against our constitution. So what we are standing for is upholding our constitution, yet our government is pandering by keeping quiet and allowing these religious forces to use religion, and they themselves use the religious card to stay in power, because they think that's a way that you can get away with it. Because, as I said, the first thing with religion is you're not supposed to question religion. So people who are, secular thinkers, people who believe in secular ideology, are considered atheists, and atheism means that you are anti everything, and that it's all right. They try and project it that it's not only all right, you go to heaven if you kill an atheist, if you kill a non-believer. So they're actually rousing this kind of religious fervor against anyone who is going against what they want to project as being the correct position.
Wow, they've got a very convenient tool to.
They do. I mean, it may be a minority, and because we are a country that fought our liberation war, and we still have people who do fight, and we are out on the street, but we do not have the support of the state agencies that we should be having, because that's what we are supposed to get. So the thing is that we are fighting against the tide, but we're fighting with the knowledge that we are fighting with what a constitution guarantees us, what's the, not only just the constitution, what the international code says about what your rights as a citizen of this
Yeah.
planet is gives you, and which
Yeah.
our country has signed. So we are very clear on that point, and we will keep on fighting, but it's a uphill task. And
Yeah.
I'll find that I'll say that having worked, I'm still working a lot with rural women, and especially rural women who are really marginalized and who are excluded from a lot of things. They are much more aware and able to fight back, and really fight back much stronger than women who have a slightly better off, within quotes, educated, within quotes, urban, who feel much more frustrated and worried
Yeah.
about losing what they have if they fight. So
Yeah.
I find it much more
Yeah.
rewarding when I work with rural women, because I find that
Thanks,
we speak
Khushi.
the same language.
I
Yeah.
need to now switch over to Mariam because we're going to be running short on time
Sorry,
now.
sorry.
Uh, Mariam, you were talking about policy making for women in Afghanistan, and we're just talking about how laws do come up to help women, but then we're not able to implement those laws. I was just the other day just wondering that we used to see these 1970s photos of Kabul and these fashionable women, and then suddenly things drastically changed after the Taliban took over, and now once again the Taliban are back. But this is a new generation of women. These are women who have internet and they've been educated. And so tell us about the current situation and how is it affecting this younger generation of women now, and how do you foresee things working out after this?
Um, uh, where I'll start from, if you'll allow me, is when Kabul was taken over by the Taliban. There were certain statements that they were very quick to make at that time, to keep calm and to show that they have changed their views. And certain statements came out like that we will be protecting the lives and property of citizens will be safe. Women and girls should return to school, work, and were encouraged actually to join the government. And this is, I'm talking about 2 days after the fall of fall of Kabul to the Taliban, that they would give a general amnesty and that an inclusive government would be formed. Now, fast forward just a couple of weeks later, a month later, and what we are seeing now is that in terms of the lives and property of people, I know from colleagues on the ground that NGOs are being searched, and NGOs that have been that are not currently in operation because they are not allowed to operate are taken over. People's homes are taken over, especially individuals who had worked with certain sectors. There is, in terms of women, girls returning to school, as you all know, that secondary school, high school has been banned for women, for girls up till now. Boys have been allowed to return, male teachers have been allowed to return to school, but for now, a decision has not yet been made on whether girls can go to secondary school. And when it comes to universities, public universities continue to remain closed as of now for everyone, but there's still a decision being made there that the only way that female professors and students can return if classes are completely segregated. And what the Taliban are stating, a secure environment is enabled for them to return, which many see as a cop-out that they use also in 96 till 2001 to prevent girls from going to school, and never then allow that to take place again. In terms of an inclusive government, what we saw come out of this inclusive interim government was one that is all men. It's the reestablishment of the Islamic Emirate, which they had said would not take place. but the emirate has come back. It excludes women completely. It excludes all representation from various minority groups. And it has members, ministers, a cabinet who have many of its of individuals on sanctions lists and terrorist lists still to date. So this is the cabinet that has been formed, the inclusive government that the Taliban had claimed that they would be creating. In the past, they had said that we would create a government that would be based on a consensus by the people. Now let's remember that from 96 till 2001, they had also established an interim government that they were supposedly going to turn into a government, but it never happened. And so we may see that same thing continue from here on. So in terms of the commitments they made when they came and what we're seeing right now, it shows that the Taliban have not changed. Let's see how these policies continue. But as of right now, it shows that they have not yet changed. They're not showing that to us. They're not translating those statements into actions on the ground. In this type of environment, for women in particular, how it will impact women, well, it will have a grave impact, as you can imagine. We had less than 1% of women attending some sort of educational institute during the Taliban regime. That increased ninefold by around 2016. Now, what we're anticipating, if such policies continue, is a drastic drop in that again. They have banned women from becoming ministers or deputy ministers. So women in decision-making circles, gone. They have allowed women to work in certain sectors, certain educational sectors only, especially in private institutions, which remain open, some. In addition to that, health sector. But everywhere else, all of those other spaces have been closed so far. But there's also an innate fear within women of returning to these spaces if and when they were open, because they don't know the conditions that will be placed. See, the Taliban, for a very long time, when we would sit and talk to them about what they meant when they said that an Islamic government based on Sharia law was their will, and that will would serve the needs and address the grievances of the people of Afghanistan that they were experiencing through the Islamic Republic. Now, of course, the Islamic Republic was anything but a perfect system, but nevertheless, it was a system that enabled space for improvement over time. So if they made these promises, we always ask, so what does that mean? What does this mean for women's rights? What does this mean for minority rights? What does this generally mean for human rights? And we would get nothing. So right now, the Religious Scholars Committee of the Taliban are deciding on these future aspects. Now, as I said, we've seen certain glimpses. For example, women banned from sports. Women banned from sports where their bodies would be inappropriately shown on media, for example. All of these types of facets. So we're gonna wait and watch how this is going to pan out. But what we are so far seeing is showing a reversal of very significant progress that we had made in the last 20 years. I'll bet they were not perfect, of course. Women were facing grave challenges in the past as well. But as I said, the spaces for improvement, the support, that was there. For example, organizations could operate, NGOs could operate, civil society, one of the greatest achievements of the last 20 years, media, one of the greatest achievements, could operate. They're suggesting, reports are showing the 700 female journalists that were in Afghanistan. There remains at the present moment about 100. There's an exodus that is taking place, and that exodus is taking place for a very good reason. And I must say that I've been hearing the panelists speak, and I must agree with them that oppression and power, which was stated, oppression and power is the tool used by the Taliban to be able to keep certain demographics in place. I'm going to give you one quick example of these contradictory movements and shifts in their thinking.
Mariam, just 1 second. I'll just quickly go to Riya because we're already short on time. And I've been waiting to ask her this question because Riya, you're part of this Dalit Women Fight, and they're largely groups of millennials, as I noticed. Tell me, how are the youth using the internet to unite across the country? Tell us a little bit about Dalit Women Fight, and give us some reason to hope for a positive future here.
So see, internet and smartphones are largely still inaccessible for women and children of my community. But there is a certain section which has now gained access over internet and smartphones. So what we see is probably a very small amount of population, Dalit population, is using social media, and it's creating currents on social media. So the whole community is still yet not on social media. We are like a couple of people who are majorly first generation learners, who are equipping themselves with this digital technology on their own, learning on their own. And they are posing challenge to Hindu religion online. They are posing challenge by using parallel and counter cultures and using Ambedkarite thoughts. So I think the change is really good, but I also feel that this will have a repercussion. More and more Dalit people, when they'll come on social media, there are already arrests, that's police arrests that's happening. Then we have random office being vandalized, professors being picked up. So we have already started facing the repercussion. But as much as it's giving, expression to our lived experiences, it is also bringing problems to us. And the large community still is not being able to use digital media. Uh, the community I work with is primarily Dalit women and children. So in this whole lockdown, it was terrible because everything went online. So it wasn't an easy journey for us, but I see a good hope that they wouldn't have learned things which the pandemic made us learn. So people with no education, women with no formal education, they were bound to use cell phones. So it was a burden that how we buy it, how we spend money on these things, where do we get the money from? That's a different matter altogether. But once procured, or once we got the hold of technology, uh, I think there's a vast gap. Like they're not as equipped as we all are who are sitting here. They are like just to discover how to save a number in itself is a big deal for them. So that's the community that's now using social media, and that is causing a big discomfort among the upper caste feminists as well as leftists and Hindu women groups in India. So I hope that we continue to create this
Keep
sort of
creating the noise.
discomfort to
Yeah.
come over the
Well,
hesitation that the
absolutely.
country.
For anything to change, I think there has to be some discomfort. And if you want to build something new, something has to break, something has to give way. And any society, I always say this, any society that discriminates against people on the basis of anything, of their caste, of their color, of their religion, of their disability or ability, that society needs to be broken, and we need to rebuild something new again. So I'm going to end with a quote of Dr. M. Sarwar, who's actually Beena's father. And he said, whenever a movement grows, such narrow minded people and enemies of the movement try to sabotage it. They find Islam in danger. They find the country in danger. They find the nation in danger. What actually in danger is their own dirty and selfish leadership. So I think that aptly sums up why people use religion, why they used different and traditional systems to oppress people. Thank you all for being here today. I had a lot of food for thought in this session, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. Do stay around. We have our next session coming up, in which we have Beena will be back again, and that's also going to be a very exciting session. So thank you all. In next 5 minutes, we're going to start our next session. So I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Great seeing all
Bye
of you.
bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.